Chapter 5 Colonial Society on the Eve of Revolution. Topic 1 Conquest by the Cradle. 1. By 1775, Great Britain ruled 32 colonies in North America. Only 13 of them revolted, the ones in what's today the U.S. Canada and Jamaica were wealthier than the original 13. All of them were growing by leaps and bounds. 2. By 1775, the population numbered 2.5 million people. 3. The average age was 16 years old, due mainly to having several children. 4. Most of the population, around 95%, was densely cooped up east, though by 1775 some had slowly trickled into Tennessee and Kentucky. 5. About 95% of the people lived in rural areas and were therefore farmers. Topic 2 Mingling of the Races. 1. Colonial America, though mostly English, had other races as well. 2. Germans accounted for about 6% of the population, or about 150,000 people by 1775. Most were Protestant, primarily Lutheran, and were called the Pennsylvania Dutch. 3. The Scots-Irish were about 7% of the population, with 175,000 people. Over many decades, they had been transplanted to Northern Ireland, but they had not found a home there. The already existing Irish Catholics resented the intruders. Many of the Scots-Irish reached America and became squatters, quarreling with both Indians and white landowners. They seemed to try to move as far from the British as possible, trickling down to Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas. In 1764, the Scots-Irish led the armed march of the Paxton Boys. The Paxtons led a march on Philadelphia to protest the Quakers' peaceful treatment of the Indians. They later started the North Carolina Regulator movement in the hills and mountains of the colony, aimed against domination by Eastern powers in the colony. They were known to be very hot-headed and independent-minded. Many eventually became American revolutionaries. 4. About 5% of the multicolored population consisted of other European groups, like French, Welsh, Dutch, Swedes, Jews, Irish, Swiss, and Scots Highlanders. 5. Americans were of all races and mixed bloods, so it was no wonder that other races from other countries had a hard time classifying them. Topic 3 The Structure of the Colonial Society. 1. In contrast to contemporary Europe, America was a land of opportunity. Anyone who was willing to work hard could possibly go from rags to riches, and poverty was scorned. Class differences did emerge, as a small group of aristocrats, made up of the rich farmers, merchants, officials, and clergymen, had much of the power. 2. Also, armed conflicts in the 1690s and 1700s enriched a number of merchants in the New England and Middle colonies. 3. War also created many widows and orphans who eventually had to turn to charity. 4. In the South, a firm social pyramid emerged containing the immensely rich plantation owners or planters, who had many slaves, though these were few. Yeomen farmers or small farmers, they owned their land and maybe a few slaves. Landless whites who owned no land and either worked for a landowner or rented land to farm. Indentured servants of America were the paupers and the criminals sent to the New World. Some of them were actually unfortunate victims of Britain's unfair laws and did become respectable citizens. This group was dwindling, though, by the 1700s, thanks to Bacon's rebellion and the move away from indentured servant labor towards slavery. Black slaves were at the bottom of the social ladder, with no rights or hopes of moving up or even gaining freedom. Slavery became a divisive issue because some colonies didn't want slaves while others needed them, and therefore vetoed any bill banning importation of slaves. Topic 4 Clerics, Physicians, and Jurists. 1. The most honored profession in the colonial times was the clergy, or priests, which in 1775 had less power than before during the height of the Bible Commonwealth, but still wielded a great amount of authority. 2. Physicians were not highly esteemed, and many of them were bad, as medical practices were archaic. Bleeding was often a favorite and deadly solution to illnesses. Plagues were a nightmare, smallpox afflicting 1 of 5 persons, including George Washington, was rampant, though a crude form of inoculation for it was introduced in 1721. Some of the clergy and doctors didn't like the inoculation, though, preferring not to tamper with the will of God. 3. At first, lawyers weren't liked, being regarded as noisy scumbags. Criminals often represented themselves in court. By 1750, lawyers were recognized as useful, and many defended high-profile cases, were great orators, and played many important roles in the history of America. Topic 5. Workaday America. 1. Agriculture was the leading industry by a huge margin, since farmers could seem to grow anything. In Maryland and Virginia, tobacco was the staple crop, and by 1759, New York was exporting 80,000 barrels of flour a year. 2. Fishing could be rewarding, though not as much as farming, and it was pursued in all the American colonies, especially in New England. 3. Trading was also a popular and prevalent industry, as commerce occurred all around the colonies. The triangular trade was a common example. For example, a ship would leave New England with rum and go to the Gold Coast of Africa and trade it for African slaves. Then it would go to the West Indies and exchange the slaves for molasses, which would be used for rum, which it sell to New England once it returned there. 4. Manufacturing was not as important, though many small enterprises existed. 5. Strong-backed laborers and skilled craftspeople were scarce and highly prized. 6. Perhaps the single most important manufacturing activity was lumbering. Britain sometimes marked the tallest trees for its navy's masts, and colonists resented that, even though there were countless other good trees in the area, and marked the tree was going towards a common defense. It was the principle of Britain first that was detested. 7. In 1733, Parliament passed the Molasses Act, which, if successful, would have struck a crippling blow to American international trade by hindering its trade with the French West Indies. The result was disagreement, and colonists got around the act through smuggling. Topic 6. Horsepower and sail power. 1. Roads in 1700s America were very poor. They only connected the large cities. It took a young Benjamin Franklin 9 days to get from Boston to Philadelphia. 2. Roads were so bad that they were dangerous. People who would venture these roads would often sign wills and pray with family members before embarking. As a result, towns seemed to cluster around slow, navigable water sources like gentle rivers or by the ocean. 3. Taverns and bars sprang up to serve weary travelers and were great places of gossip and news. 4. An intercolonial mail system was set up in the mid-1700s, but mailmen often passed time by reading private letters since there was nothing else to do. Topic 7. Dominant denominations. 1. Two large established churches, taxes supported by 1775, were the Anglican and Congregational. 2. A great majority of people didn't worship in churches. 3. The Church of England, aka the Anglican Church, was official in Georgia, both Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland, and a part of New York. Anglican sermons were shorter, and its descriptions of hell were less frightening, amusements were less scorned. For Anglicans, not having a resident bishop proved to be a problem for unordained young ministers, so William and Mary was founded in 1693 to train young clergy members. 4. The Congregational Church had grown from the Puritan Church, and it was established in all the New England colonies except for Rhode Island. There was worry by the late 1600s that people weren't devout enough.